Okay, welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha Priti, and I'm here with a group of seekers, and we are reading through the Bhagavad Gita. We started this back in August? So it's been a good long time. We're in chapter 3 today. Chapter 3 is about karma yoga, and we just finished a section where Krishna was explaining to Arjuna the difference between a person who's attached, who's doing attached work, and a person who's doing detached work. And he talked about how a person who's attached is very much so controlled by the modes of nature. And we talked about those modes of nature. There's three modes of nature. There's tamas, rajas, and sattva. And we talked about some of the different characteristics of those modes of nature. And we're going to get more into that in chapter 14. But just to give a brief little overview so we can remember, sattva is like the highest ring of consciousness. It's like when you're content, you're very content, you're reflective, you're making decisions in like a very thoughtful, deliberate way. Rajas it's characterized more by like passion and desire and, think like Wall Street and like you're never satiated. You're just like always going, going, going. And then tamas is more like you're lethargic, you're tired. Maybe like substances are in this category. This is it's a pretty low mode of material nature. So as I just explained it, consciousness goes down. And the idea is that we're all impacted by these modes of nature. And when we're attached, we may think that I'm the doer. This is me. We may take credit for what's going on around us, but really we should understand that we are so impacted by the modes of material nature. So we're still kind of in that section. We're going to finish that section up today. We're going to start with text 29, chapter 3, text 29. I'll share my screen. Oh, and if you ever want to join us, because we are live here and it's so great, we're like a little family. If you ever want to join us live, we meet Mondays, Thursdays, 7:30 a.m. Eastern time. And you can email me for the links at seekersquest108@gmail.com. So that's how you can join us. Okay, text 29 says, bewildered by the modes of material nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities and become attached. But the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge. Okay, so Krishna is saying here that the attached person thinks that what they're doing is great. There's nothing wrong with it. They become attached to it, and then they become entangled. But they don't really know that's happening. They think everything's going great, right? The detached person does not become entangled, right? A detached person, whatever work they're doing, they don't become entangled in it because they're detached. And the detached person understands why people are attached, right? He understands that they're driven by the gunas. That's the three modes. It's called the gunas. And they're over-identified with the ego and material nature. And Krishna is saying here that we should be compassionate and sensitive to this, right? So if we talked about this a lot, if we're dealing with somebody who we identify is, in a lower mode, like say they're really angry and they're really acting out on their anger, we should be compassionate and sensitive, and we should deliberately choose what mode we show up in, hopefully a higher one, and we're not impulsive and kind of matching that mode. We should be compassionate and sensitive. And although the person is ignorant, by working responsibly, this person will still get gradual realization. So we talked about how, if there's a wise person who's detached and an unwise person who's very attached, how the unwise person can't just jump right up to the platform of the wise person, to that level of consciousness. They can't just be pulled right up automatically, right? It takes a gradual realization. And in this is how the modes play a part, because the modes, as we describe them, are gradually increasing your consciousness as we go from tamas to rajas to sattva. It's gradually increasing your consciousness. So as as we're doing that, you're getting closer to this level of detachment, right? So at the very low level, a lazy or an active person who's in Thomas, they don't realize that I'm not the doer. They always think if I wanted to, I could have done this and that, and they're kind of stuck in that mode. But when you get to the Rajas mode, when you get to a person who's passionate and who's a lot of has a lot of desires, they may think that I'm the doer, and then they'll try to do a bunch of things. And in the course of doing all those things, they'll start getting realization, right? They'll see sometimes that they work very hard and that things didn't quite work out. And they'll see that sometimes they hardly put any energy into things and things just like completely open up for them, realizing that they're not the doer, because that's what we're all trying to come to this realization here, that there's things outside of me, forces that are bigger than me, that are really controlling what's going on here. And the impact I have, though I may have some impact, is not the biggest impact, right? So realizations accumulate over time, and they come to the realization that I'm not the doer and that there's something beyond me and that are doing these things. And this is the path for all of us. All of us, are probably attached to some degree. And this is why these modes can be so helpful, because they give us this framework of which we can recognize where we are internally, what our environment is, right? There's different modes depending on your environment. Like we talked about, like New York City is very passionate, very rajastic. Nature is very sattvic. Spending time in nature is kind of resonates that energy. It's very sattvic. Somewhere a place that's tamastic would be like maybe a bar or like I don't know, like a strip club. I can't believe I just said that during a Gita class. But anyway, so back to this, I talked about this example. Todd was texting me about how he's thinking that he's working too much and that he wants to have more fun. And we talked about this fun, and I think I said in the last episode, oh, spiritualists, we like to have fun. We like to go to kirtan. We like to associate with like-minded people. Even if you're not, that doesn't have to be the limit of your fun. You can still increase your consciousness and not partake in spiritual activities. You could just go sit in nature and you're getting closer to sattvic. You're raising your consciousness. If you go from somewhere like a really high anxiety, stressful situation, like a work environment that has that, and you go to a place where you're sitting in nature, you're being more reflective, you're connecting with what's going on around you. That's sattvic. You're increasing your consciousness and you're upgrading your consciousness rather. And that's what the modes help us to do. They help us to identify things that are upgrading our consciousness. Same thing with foods, things like fruits, vegetables, like these things are sattvic. And then we have a whole level of things that are rajasic, a whole level of things that are tamasic. So the more sattvic things that we can put into our lives, the more environments, the more food, the more people, the more behaviors, right? The more that we can upgrade our consciousness. And that's what we're trying to do here. Get to that top level, that sattvic level of contentment. That's really what sattva is categorized, contentment. And if we can that's our goal. We're trying to get up to that level so we can start kind of seeing things around us, our choices, the way we spend our time, the people that we associate with, the way that we talk to our family members, right? And we can gradually make elevation. So and we probably have all seen this in our lives, to some extent. We've started to have these realizations, and that's why we're here, right? I used to work as an engineer, and I left. I got to the point where I'm like, I don't really know why I'm doing this. Like I got to the point where it was okay if I didn't make money. And other than that, it was like, well, then what am I doing here? So I left to do service. And I thought, oh, I'm completely detached, And in that service, I found that there were things I was attached to. I was still attached to my ego. There was a lot of ego there. And that was very confronting as I was doing that, So then it was like, okay, I was kind of getting pruned. I was kind of figuring out that I'm not the doer, that I'm not the controller. And then that service ended. And then I ended up spending a lot of time with my friend, my neighbor. She's this Indian lady who is so sattvic. Everything in her life is sattvic. Her like she has like gardens all around her house where they grow all of their food, and she spends like all day like, harvesting this food, cooking these like beautiful meals, but all in like a very like, like I'd say slow because I'm so rajasic, but very like calm, like settling. And I started spending like every day with her. And at first I was like, this is kind of like boring. Like what, she hardly gets anything done in like this amount, because I'm like such a super like, okay, I get this. But then there's something about it that's kind of like relaxing. It's kind of like nice, to realize like I don't have to do all of these things all the time. I don't have to achieve all of these things all the time. I don't have to be, I could just be, and in that find like connection and fulfillment. And that was kind of like some of my progression of realization. And it's, still happening all the time because I have a very rajasic nature. But that was very refreshing. And then when I got back into doing some service, I could try to incorporate some of that mode, some of that way of being that was like a totally new thing to me. So I think we can all, maybe kind of reflect back on our lives and times that have been maybe more tamastic. Maybe we haven't been motivated to get off the couch. That was my pregnancy. Like not motivated to move, just eating junk food. Where we're tamasic and how that feels. And and then, times where we're majestic, where we're just going after money, success, achievement, endless desires. We're constantly moving, moving, moving. Every hour and every day is filled with a schedule, right? And then hopefully times where we've been more sattvic, where we've, calmed down a little bit, maybe gone on a vacation and spent a lot of time in nature, just sitting and chanting. I say that because that's like my favorite thing to do in vacation, sit in nature and chant. And how this feels, when we're in these different modes. And the goal is to start kind of molding our lives more into a sattvic kind of consciousness. And again, so making those kinds of decisions for our lives, because that's right, that sattvic mode is like the launching pad into the transcendental plane. And we're actually going to talk about that in the next verse. So that's where we're going with this, as we're going up through the modes, we're getting more detached. We're realizing that we're not the doer, and we're arriving at that plane, that launching pad for transcendental connection. So Krishna is saying that Arjuna may be on the detached level, but again, other warriors are on the attached level, and there's no reason to disturb them. Right? You can't just take somebody who's at a lower consciousness and say, okay, I'm going to tell you some things, and then you'll know them, and then you'll be able to act at a higher consciousness. They have to kind of go through their own process. They have to have their own experience, their own realizations, and arrive there. Right? So he's saying if they're working at the attached level, they will become gradually elevated. At the same time, the person that is maybe at a higher level has a responsibility for that person that is below, and therefore set an example, like we talked about in the previous section, right? So the person that is below is not quite ready to become disentangled from the world. So set an example by which that person can become gradually elevated. So this is where Krishna is saying to still work, still do your work in a detached manner. Set that example that this is the right thing to do. This is the dharmic thing to do. And so that even people that are attached will follow that example. And from that, they'll gradually become elevated. So that's what Krishna is saying here. So we'll move on to the next verse, unless anybody wants to share anything. Okay. So 330. 330 says, therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. Okay, so this verse is a summary of what's been explained up till now. And I'll explain some like over some high level lessons or kind of like takeaways that we get from this section. And then I'll zoom in a little bit more on this verse specifically. So when they're talking about things we should take away from this section. Surrendering all of our actions to the divine. This is a common theme in here. Offer your actions to a higher purpose without selfish motives or attachment to the results. And there's stepping stones to this, right? Even if we're not so like, we're like, I'm not really ready to surrender to God. I still have some like apprehensions about the whole God concept. That's fine, right? We can practice this principle in our lives, just in our immediate surroundings, and we can see great benefit, right? Like if we're working on a project, think of it as serving a greater good, not just for personal gain, right? Try to kind of broaden your motives to kind of upgrade your motives, right? So that it's not all about me. It's not all about this ego-centered mentality, but we're doing something for the greater good. Like, if you have a family, this is like this is such this is like work that you'll constantly have. This never goes away. You have a family and you're trying to think of ways to serve your family, your kids, your spouse, and you're not just making it about you. Right? This is like the perfect example of how we start to become pruned from being this like single mindset of, it's all about me, it's whatever I want, whenever I want, to, oh wow, now I have all these dependents, I have these animals, I have these kids, I have this spouse, I have to think broader than just me. And in that, we're kind of preparing ourselves, or not if you don't, but at the same time, practicing these kinds of principles will make your life more fulfilling, right? Fix your mind on the self. Right? Keep your mind rooted in spiritual awareness, remembering that your true identity is the soul, not the body or ego. And so during a challenging situation, remind yourself that these external outcomes are temporary, but inner growth and spiritual progress are lasting. So whatever we invest in our soul is eternal, right? Because our soul's eternal. Whatever we invest in this body is temporary. So keep that in perspective. And at the same time, when your body or your mind is kind of rocked by these waves of material existence, recognize that that's temporary. Put that into perspective. Know that they're just little waves in this big ocean. And we don't need to become attached, right? We know our true identity, and in that we can act from that place. Right? And Narayani says Srila Prabhupada was speaking about brothels. Okay, good. So I could speak I could speak about that. And Andrew says most of the times we aren't using the moments with the external work for that spiritual progress. Then when the kids are gone, the job is retired, etc., you are left back with what now? Yeah, we are. Yeah, that we get so caught up in the problem of the day, what's going on with all of our responsibilities, our obligations, that it's almost like we're just like surviving, right? And then we're lifted from that responsibility a little bit. We come to that place where it's like, what's the purpose of all this? This is all, I'm done with my responsibilities. So what now? Yeah, that's a great point. That's another way to do it. If you can do it in the moment, if you can, kind of start to cultivate some of these realizations as you're going through it, the better prepared you'll be for that moment when it all lifts and you get to kind of that place of, I think some people get to like a midlife crisis where, it's like, what's my purpose? What am I doing here? But if we know now and we can practice that, all the better we can be prepared as life shifts and things change. We'll be able to, we won't be shaken so much by them. We won't, because we have been cultivating this realization of our true identity all along with it. But yeah, that's definitely probably more common and also okay. It's also another way. So act without desire, another thing. Perform your duties without being driven by the desire for rewards or outcomes. Again, because the rewards or outcomes are out of your control. So if we become too attached to them, if we become too like, I need this to be happy, or if this doesn't happen the way I want it to, I'm gonna have a meltdown, right? Then it's gonna shake our whole core and it's gonna knock us off track. Right. So if, again, we can start off with just little bits of this, like if you're helping someone, do it out of kindness rather than expecting gratitude or reciprocation, right? Really just try to purify your desires just on a small scale, maybe with your spouse, right? Maybe you take up an extra responsibility and you don't look to them for doing the same thing, right? You just do it, and you don't think about it. You don't get into this game of like tit for tat, right? It's just like you just do it, and you let it go. And that's the reward, right? We try to practice that more. We try to get into this mindset. Be free from ego. Let go of the sense of I and mine in your reactions, right? Recognize that you're an instrument of the divine. It's not about you. It's not even, every time before I do this podcast, I think I just said this before. I pray to be used as an instrument, because oftentimes I feel so underqualified to present some of this knowledge that I feel like, okay, whatever you want me to do, please just use me as an instrument in that. And I think sometimes because I do that prayer before, afterwards, if I feel like something really resonated or we all really connected, I feel like, oh, thank you. Thank you, God. Thanks for like, I feel like that was him, because I'm trying to practice that cultivation, and it helps because I feel so underqualified. So I might feel like I need a lot of shelter. And then afterwards, I feel that, and it really lets go of a lot of the anxiety. We get so stuck in the anxiety when we think everything's dependent on us, right? What in like, and that's not even our true position, right? We're trying to take that true position. That's God's true position, but we try to take that. And in that, we get so much anxiety and we get so much stress. So we let go of that. And on a small scale, we can practice this, even if we're not practicing it with God. If we achieve success, acknowledge the contribution of others, and divine grace rather than taking full credit. So acknowledge that wherever you are, it's not because you got there, right? It's because of all these people that invested in you along the way to get you where you are. And practice seeing that and appreciating that instead of getting centered and focused in this I-centered mentality that I caused all of this. I'm the reason for my success. And kind of being oblivious to those that helped you along the way. Right? So all of this is geared towards getting out of this I am the doer mentality. Because as long as we think that we're the doer, we are stuck in the modes, right? We're being controlled by the modes. So we want to act without anxiety, right? Perform your duties calmly without stress or worry about the results. And this will happen naturally if we can let go of our attachment to the results. Right? Before an exam or a presentation, focus on just preparing your best without obsessing over the outcome. Right? So really focus on the internals. Is this my sincere best that I can do? And let go of the outcome. Right? This will reduce your anxiety and improve your performance. So these principles, again, wherever you apply them, whatever scale you apply them to, if you just apply them to your family life or your work life, your relationships, whatever you apply them to, you will see benefit. You will see gradual elevation. And if you apply, and that's all preparing us to apply at the highest level in our relationship with God, where we'll get the ultimate elevation for our soul, right? So the last one is fulfill your duties, engaging your responsibilities wholeheartedly without avoiding them. So if you have family or work obligations, fulfill them diligently instead of procrastinating or escaping, but just perform them as if you're so attached to the result, except you're not at all. Right? That's the ultimate goal. You put your whole heart into it as if the result completely depended on everything that you do, but know inside that it doesn't, and be detached. That's where we're trying to get. And so Krishna is telling in this verse not to disidentify with the modes, right? Not to think that it's me. So he's saying no lethargy. That's the tamastic mode. That's the bottom mode. He's saying no craving, no possessiveness. That's the middle mode, the rajastic mode. He's saying spiritual consciousness. So be conscious of one's spiritual identity, right? Which is the difference between the soul and the body. That's the mode of sattva, being conscious of that spiritual identity, the difference between the soul and the body. And then when he adds surrendering all your work unto me, when he adds that in this little verse, he's saying the wise are detached from the modes, and he's saying this little requirement it transcends fighting in the mode of goodness, which is the sattva, which is like karma, which is detached action. This is where he takes it up a level to bhakti yoga. So we have the three modes. There's another platform right above sattva, which is called Suddhu sattva, which is like pure consciousness. And this is bhakti yoga. This is where we're not just working on the level of detachment, but we're working with devotion, with love for God. And this is bhakti yoga. This is where we aspire to get to this super pure platform. We're not just detached, but we're working with love. We're working with love for God, dedicating all work to Krishna. And this is where knowledge of the soul's eternal relationship with God exists. Right. So at the sattva platform, if we're working in the mode of sattva, we're aware of the difference between the body and the soul, and we're detached from the results for our own personal gain, our own personal gratification. But when we get to that next level, and this is the first time we talked about this, called Suddha sattva, this is more where we're aware of our personal relationship with God. And not only are we detached, right, but we're working in a mood of love and devotion for God. So that's like the highest level. And that's why we even want to get to this sattva platform, because again, that's the launching pad into this relation, understanding our real relationship with God. So Krishna is saying if he follows these 4 prescriptions, right, don't be lethargic, don't be tamastic, don't be possessive, don't be rajastic, and have this spiritual consciousness and surrender everything to me. That's brings us to that next platform. If you follow these 4 prescriptions, you won't be entangled. Saying if you're aware of these things, although you're fighting, there'll be no entanglement because there's no material attachment or identification with the modes. So this is how we get free from the modes. And this is the gradual staircase. And again, it's for each of us to identify as we're going throughout our days where we are. And it's going to be different every day. It's going to be different every circumstance. But notice where your tendencies are, right? What kind of energy you bring to a situation and what kind of situations you're attracted to, what kind of environments you're attracted to, what kind of people you're attracted to. And then try to, make a little bit better, make a little bit higher of a decision. Like if you love New York City, which is great, and it's a city of unlimited desires, and, maybe take a yoga class. Maybe try to do something to settle your mind a little bit. Even though you're in a rajastic environment, you're going to a yoga class and you're getting you're bringing the energy to a place of a little bit more contentment, right? So we can all do this in our life. We can all make these little tweaks so that we can make this incremental elevation. And that's the way to do it. And that's the point here. It's not, somebody can't come in and just pull you from the lowest level up. People can help you along your way, but it has to be gradual realization, incremental progress for it to be sustainable and lasting, right? So that is the section on the modes and the doer and the difference between attached work and detached work. So now we're going to move to, oh no, we have one more verse, I think. Now we're going to move to a different section. 331. Does anybody want to share anything before we move sections? Okay, 331. 331. Those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions and who follow this teaching faithfully without envy become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. Okay, so when we think about chapter 3 and we kind of walk through what we've gone through, we had a section 17, text 17 through 24 talked about detached action for setting an example. Right? Krishna gave himself as an example. He talked about that King Janaka, remember? The importance of, even if you are renounced, you still need to work so that we can set an example for people that are attached to maintain order in society, right? And to help gradually elevate other people. So that was that section. And then 25 through 29, he talks about how detached action is different from attached action. This is the section we were just in, where we talked about people that are attached or think that they're the doer, but they're really being controlled by the modes, and how to make gradual elevation such that we can get from this level of attached work to detached work. And he even gave us a little bit of a foreshadow of bhakti yoga there, right? So it's above that level, above the level of sattva. And we're at that level of that pseudo sattva, that pure transcendental goodness, where we're really working in a mood of just love and surrender to God, which is the ultimate goal. But even if it's not for you, the sattva has being existing in material life in the mode of sattva is where the contentment and the most fulfillment exists. We'll experience that as we start elevating our consciousness. And it might even feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, because we're so used to running and doing and going, and this, especially in the West here, the culture that we have of like, I need to do, I need to achieve, I need to be. But that's not, we're never content there, right? We're always anxious. We're always feeling like something's missing. We're always feeling like we have to, be something more, right? And in that, we're not content. So we'll realize when we're really content, we're more comfortable with the space, with the reflection, right? With just being. And in that, there's that authenticity, that place that we can really connect authentically. So 30 through 31, now we're in this section where Krishna's going to talk about the importance of accepting this message, all these things that he just shared, work to set an example, how detached action is different from attached action. Now he's going to talk about the importance of accepting this message. He's saying that a person who follows this message faithfully and non-enviously, which we're going to break down too, will be free from bondage. Right? So learning something is important. It's important to learn these concepts, but living something is much more important. Right? I was having a conversation with Veda the other day, and we were talking about something, and I said, I don't really know that. And he said, you know that. You're just being humble. I'm like, no, I'm really not being humble. I mean, I might know it, but I don't live it. Right. And there's such a big difference. It's one thing to know something, but to really live it is realizing it, right? That's what just takes wisdom to realized knowledge is when we can really imbibe it in such a way that we live it. And that's what's really important. That's the entire point of philosophy, not just to like know things so that we can, look smart or teach them to other people, but to live them. And that's what will make the most profound impact in our own lives and the lives of people around us. Right? So the word faith, when we talk about faith, it often has a negative connotation, right? Because it's associated with like blind faith, which makes people gullible and like easy to manipulate, and therefore like easily abusable, and can be really negative, right? And oftentimes people associate this word faith with that. They think of all of those negative things. But the Gita offers a different definition of faith, where it's not blind faith, but it's more reasonable faith, right? And when I say reasonable, I mean that it's like sensible and verifiable, right? So it's sensible in the fact that when we hear claims from a tradition, we understand that they broadly make sense. You guys come to these Gita classes a couple times a week, and you understand, you hear what's happening, you hear what's being said, and you're like, that makes sense. I can see where that shows up. I can see how that can kind of connect. Maybe not everything, but some things, at least. Some things you see where they broadly make sense. And then you see that when you mold your lives according to that it's verifiable. You see that as you go from a tamastic place to a rajasic place, you get a little bit more freedom, right? And then as you go from a rajasic place to a sattvic place, you get much more freedom. And in that, you find more contentment, right? And so you see, okay, yeah, maybe there is some truth to these modes, to this gradual elevation of consciousness. I can see it. And in that way, it becomes verifiable, right? So this is the process of faith. So Krishna's message that he's giving Arjuna here, it's a reasoned analysis and explanation. And when Arjuna has questions, Krishna answers them. So Krishna's giving him a process that leads to a result, and therefore this result that Krishna or Arjuna will see and verify the process, right? So in that way, it makes the faith is not blind. So it's like a doctor's talking to a patient and giving them some kind of treatment. And it might take some level of faith for the patient to practice the treatment. But the doctor explains the process, and the patient's like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So I'll try it out. And then the patient follows the prescription, and then the patient sees improvement. And in that way, his faith is verified, right? So that's the same thing that we're doing here. Krishna is explaining the process and telling him, therefore, you won't be bound. And so he's practicing it, and then he'll get to make a decision. Is this verifiable or not? And that's the same way that we should be developing faith, right? Sometimes, just to like jump into something just because we kind of want to, or we're like, oh, I'm 100% bought in, and that sometimes that could be a little bit superficial, right? It could be a little bit like then the next thing that comes up that sounds good, that sounds like it might get us out of some of our material misery, we'll jump right in, and then in that way, it's like our faith. We don't have a lot of conviction in our faith, right? So, but if we really want to have this strong conviction in our faith, and we want to be like trees in this like deep roots, then we have to understand that this is a process, and we're on it. So we hear these truths, things that sound reasonable, we try out, and then we can verify in that way. So that's the Gita's kind of process of faith. And that's the beautiful thing about the Gita too, is again, it gives us this process so that wherever you are in your consciousness, in your relationship with God or not, you can make elevation and you can see improvements in your life. So the other thing that it says in this verse is without envy, right? It says that without envy. It says those who execute their duties according to my injunctions without envy become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, what it means without envy. It can seem a little bit strange, right, to think about not being envious of God, right? It's easy to see when we're envious of our peers or the people around us. But what does it actually mean to not be envious of God, right? Envy usually develops towards somebody who's like at a higher position than us, or like maybe they have a nicer car or a nicer house, or something that we're envious of, that they're at a higher level. Well, we consider them to be at a higher level, and therefore we're envious, right? So when we're following God's instructions, that implies that we're accepting that God is superior to us, right? That we're servants of God, that God is superior to us. Therefore, we're following his instructions. God is supreme. We're accepting that. That's like the inherent assumption if we're following God's instructions, that he's supreme, right? In the same way that like a child would follow their parents' instructions because they would accept that they're supreme, right? So if we're envious, we're not accepting that, right? We don't follow his instructions. We don't accept that he's supreme. We're probably thinking that I know better, right? And how many of us have gotten to that mindset in that situation? I know I have, like, time and time again, will probably continue to, because this is a difficult thing to do, right? But it can be a challenge. It's a challenge to accept God's superior position, right? It brings the mindset of like, who are you to tell me what to do? We all like to feel like that we're in control of our own paths, our own destiny, right? When destiny is actually really a product of our karma and time, but still, we like to feel like we're in control, and we have a hard time kind of letting that go. But the Gita teaches us that Krishna is our well-wisher. And when God guides us, it's for our own good. And so like a doctor-patient relationship or a parent-child or a coach-trainee, right? Like if an athlete feels jealous of his coach, it's not going to work, right? There has to be an accepting that this person is guiding me, knows more than me, cares about me on some level, so let them guide me. There has to be that kind of dynamic for that kind of relationship to work. We often associate a superior position to be negative, right? Especially those of us that have maybe been misled by someone in a superior position or exploited, right? These things can make it really difficult to actually trust that someone's out there who has our best interests at heart, who's looking out for us, and that we can kind of surrender some of that control to, right? That's sometimes like the hardest or last thing that we want to do. And it takes kind of learning how to trust again to even get to that place sometimes, right? Like maybe you've been in a series of relationships where you just had no trust. You did not feel like that person had your back or was looking out for you. In fact, you felt like the opposite. Right. So when you turn to think about a relationship with divinity, it's like your conditioning is such that that's not even some place that you can go, much more open your heart to. Right. So it takes some of this experience, some of these experiences to get there. And that's why, again, trying to get to that platform of sattva, living that sattvic life is so important to prime you for this spiritual life, for this relationship with God, because that's the a sattva relationship is one of trust and love and reciprocation and mutual respect, right? Whereas a rajasic relationship would maybe be one of like tit for tat, like transactional, maybe more. I'm getting my desires fulfilled, and that person would be viewed more as, as an order filler for the other person. So we want to get to this higher level of consciousness so that we can even, approach God, divinity in a way that's going to benefit us, that's going to be upgrading, that's going to be the best for our heart and our soul. Right? And so this is where we are. We have to recognize that this hierarchical thing, it's a fact of life, and it can actually be beautiful. It doesn't have to be disgusting, right? Like a person leading another person. Like my mom raised me. Now I'm raising a child. And it is kind of beautiful to think like ultimately none of us got here on our own. We're all guided, we're all uplifted by somebody else. And then hopefully we can do that same thing. And in that way, it's a beautiful relationship, this kind of hierarchy, um, superior kind of relationship. And it's based on competence. If it's based on competence, it can be uplifting. But if the person's unqualified, who's in this superior position, if someone's claiming to be a doctor and they're not, and they just have this attitude like, I'm a doctor, you have to obey me. And then the patient's like fearful, like if I'm listening to a doctor, it'll be harmful. Um, that can really lead to a lot of negative things and ultimately degrading the consciousness and isn't good in life and isn't good with divinity. Right. So we have to get to that place, hopefully in our relationships, hopefully preparing our consciousness for this place that we can accept God's superior position. And in that, we can let go a little bit of our own control, our own way, our own doer mentality, and let God lead us a little bit, right? So this non-envy means acceptance of God's position. Does anybody want to share anything?
I was just saying that's what I did in August on my road trip. There was no plans other than the destination, one of the destinations. I had no plans on where I was sleeping each night, where I was eating, what city we were going to. We just decided me and my Siberian Husky decided where we were going, and we drove from Leesburg, Florida, all the way to New Orleans, Houston, Dallas, and then finally Denver, and then back to here. Um,
Yeah.
it, it,
Yeah.
it's crazy for you to when you wake up in the morning in the back of a vehicle saying, "All right, God, where am I going today?" And then just go.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful example. And this can look different for all of us in our lives in different ways. How do we let God guide us? And it's maybe not so much um trying to let God guide us as much as just letting go of us trying of the mentality that we know and that we have a plan and that it has to work out according to this. It's more like the more that we can let go of that mentality, the more that we can allow space for divinity to arrange. Because as long as we're taking that position that's not rightfully ours, divinity, there's no space for divinity to step in. God's not going to just insert himself. It's like if you want that, if you're the controller and you're convinced of that, God's going to let you ride that out, right? And realize eventually, as you keep bumping your head up against the wall, that maybe this isn't your rightful position. And in that, we try to give a little bit of space. Yeah, that example's beautiful. You could do that on a road trip. You could do that in your day-to-day life. You could do that in your career, in your
And it's hard to
relationship.
do. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's
No.
hard. I made it a point to do that just because I wanted to, because I could also, but because I wanted to really experience what it would be like to just not have a plan and force myself to be guided.
Yeah.
And when you're
And
4,000 miles away from home, it's crazy.
yeah. No, that's beautiful. Love that. And we can do that by, I love what you said, letting go of your plan or being okay if all of a sudden your plan changes. Like, oh, okay, accepting, seeing that as God's hand and not as, oh, things didn't go the way I wanted them to. This isn't okay. This person screwed this up, saying, okay, I guess that's God's plan. Let's see what happens. Staying open to that. Yeah, thank you. Karina, do you have an example for us?
I think you just answered it with your last comment there. I was just going to say that, when life's going really good and you're feeling so blessed, it's just like, oh, thank you, Krishna. This is your plan for me. This is great. But when we hit that bump on the road and something in our lives just not working out, it's trying not to, um, it's trying to accept that this is also Krishna's plan rather than why is this happening? I think the first instinct is to get a little bit agitated and angry. I was trusting you, so why is this happening? But it is just the trust and the acceptance that it's all part of the plan, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can practice that even like if we have a spouse, and the spouse desires things differently than we do. How much can we just accept, okay, maybe that's Krishna's plan and let go of our own plan and let that ride out? How much can we do that? Assuming that, it's a healthy place and that all of those things, but just the concept of letting go of our own attachments, our own desires, our own feeling like we know the best way and being open to, okay, maybe I can't see the other end of this, what's at the other end of this mountain, but I can release some level of control and accept that it's God's hand in getting me there and and see how that plays out. Yeah, Davy Erotica, please share with us. Oh, you're on mute, hun.
Yeah, my fingers aren't working. I don't have my contacts in, so I can't see. Um, anyway, Hare Krishna. I always love the fact that I can join live. I wish I could more. And each time I do, it's always like a spot on message. Um, I mean, right now, the ability, because of my connection with Krishna, to be in a situation with my oldest daughter that I want to know. I want the outcome. I don't want to be in this. I don't want to see her suffer. Um, my heart hurts for her heart, but yet I'm like blown away by the ability that I've developed because of bhakti and because of sangha and seva and my relationship with my higher power to see in all of the crisis mode right now so many blessings. Like I'm not one to give myself a lot of credit or toot my own horn, but like it's amazingly beautiful to know that when life isn't going your way, or when you can't control the outcome, or you think you know best, especially when it comes to parenting, that there is a plan, and within what seems like the end of the world for a 19-year-old, or a really difficult time for a family, there's so much opportunity to grow and learn, and um, there's so many different things, for lack of a better word, that have just come up day to day to day, that remind me, like, even though this path is difficult right now for her and for all of us, it's the right path, and the next right thing will come. And I don't know if I could have been in this place if it wasn't for all you guys, and the whole bhakti yoga movement coming into my life. So I just want to say thanks. I'm so grateful to be able to say I'm truly blessed to be where I am at this moment. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys. So thanks.
Thank you, Devi Radhika. That was beautiful. I was just talking to Devi Radhika this week, and you told me something actually that has stuck with me this week on a lot. She told me parenting is the ultimate surrender. And I think that all the time. Like, anytime I'm doing something and I have a plan for how it's going to be and how my baby's going to respond to it, and it's like, okay, just go with this. Whatever happens, and we just reroute, we just go with it. But it's like the constant. I don't think I've ever been so challenged in this, like, I'm not the doer mentality, than having a little baby, a little 7 pound like dictator that I follow around. I have no control, and it's the ultimate surrender. And that's what we should be learning. That's what we need to be learning here. Yeah. Wait until your heart leaves the home without you. Oh goodness, I'm not ready for that. I'm still getting over the fact that she had a cold a couple days ago. Yeah. So we have to learn these things. Does anybody else want to share? Okay. Should we do one more? We have 4. How long is this? I don't know. Do we do one more, or should we save it? What do you guys think? Somebody give me a direction. Do one more, save it.
Do it.
Do it. Okay, we'll do it. So 32. 32 says, but those who, out of envy, disregard these teachings and do not follow them regularly are to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. So this verse goes along with the last verse. It's basically saying the same point, but by contrast, right? So in 31, he's talking about the faithful. And in 32, he's talking about the faithless. So he's saying 2 consequences of faithlessness here is that your knowledge is diluted, so you don't really know the right way to go. And because of that, your consciousness is misdirected. And we talked about it's bad to not know, right? But it's even worse to think that you know, even when you don't know, right? You think that you know, even when you don't. So it's one thing just to not know. Okay, you're ignorant, that's fine. But to think that you know when you don't know, that can be dangerous. And that's where your consciousness gets directed. Because if we remember this consciousness, it's like a flashlight beam, what's that word? Emanating from the soul. And whatever that flashlight beam gets directed to is where that energy goes, right? And so in that, it gets directed to everything except what it actually should, right? So it needs to be directed towards the ultimate reality. But instead it gets directed everywhere else. And this is the story of all of our material existence, is that we're flashing that beam, that flashlight beam, that stream of consciousness to everything except the ultimate reality, right? All these pseudo realities, the material existence around us that we're attaching to, that we're thinking is real, but it's really temporary. So that's the danger here. That's the danger when we don't have faith, is we get attached to this world around us that honestly could just be pulled from us at any time, right? So the other thing here is what we know doesn't define us as much as what we want to know, right? So Prabhupada says a really nice quote in here. I'm going to read it. He says a really nice quote in this purport. He says, there are many philosophers who write comments on the Gita but have no faith in Krishna. They will never be liberated from the bondage of fruit of action. But an ordinary man with firm faith in the eternal injunctions of the Lord, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from the bondage of the law of karma. So basically saying, like, even if you're unable to follow all the instructions, if you are not resentful of this principle and you're working sincerely, you're better off. You're better off than somebody who maybe has all the knowledge and can, recite all of these slokas and all of this information, but doesn't actually have any amount of faith to practice it. Right? And you don't have to have full faith. You don't have to, be diving in head first, but some amount of faith required to practice it, so that then it becomes verifiable, and therefore we can make this progress. If you don't have that, but you have all the knowledge, it's worthless, right? And it's more important to be open to what we don't know than to know a lot, right? People, I think, was I saying this to Todd the other day? People that are open, you hear people that are just like always sharing all that they know. But it's better to be a person who's open to learning more, who's maybe a little bit more humble and trying to learn more and acknowledging that they don't know very much. Those people are the ones who actually know the most, right? Because people that just are so proud of what they know are oftentimes kind of closed to knowing more. Like they think that they know it all. And so that automatically kind of like closes them from actually taking in more. But if you can maintain this humble attitude that maybe you don't, maybe there's always something to learn from anybody. Right? I remember I had a boyfriend one time when I was in college, and he told me this one time, and I thought it was like so revolutionary to me at the time that like, he's like, you can learn anything from anybody. And I was like, no, you can't. I was so like narrow-minded. I was like, I'm only going to talk to people that are really, really, intelligent. Or he's like, you can learn anything from anybody. And I was like, okay. But I actually think about that all the time now, because you can learn something from anybody. And the more open that you can be to that, and that doesn't mean we don't discern about what we learn, but the point is, if we can be open to it instead of this mentality that we already know, we can actually progress much further. So we have to work on cultivating this attitude of humility, recognizing how much there is to know. Right? It's an infinite amount of things to know, and how our understanding is so limited because we're limited. Right? We're limited. We're not the whole. God's the whole. We're just part and parcel. We're just a fragment. We're limited. And because we are limited in that, we remain open to learning more. We're never full like that. So when someone refuses to have faith, they go down. And therefore, Krishna's telling Arjuna that you need to have faith. This needs to be a choice. So if we make the initial choice, gradually we'll see that this faith becomes verified. And to build this conviction, it's usually gradual. And when we think about all the things in this material world that we take shelter of, you say, oh, I don't have a lot of faith in God. But the fact is, we're creatures that have to have shelter. Like that's the way we're designed. So if you don't have faith in God, you have faith in something, right? You're taking shelter of something, maybe material possessions, maybe relationships, right? A romantic partner, or your family, your mom and dad, career, achievement, physical strength, health. Who takes shelter of their health, right? I'm gonna eat so healthy. This is what I told this example of my mom the other day. She's like, she ate so healthy, And then she almost went blind in one eye. And then she said, I'm going to stop eating. I'm going to stop eating so healthy. What's the point of eating this so healthy? She realized that her health isn't really a shelter, right? We like to believe that it is, but it's really not. It can be pulled from us at any time. All of these things can be pulled from us at any time, but we still take so much shelter in them, right? That's the ego, personal abilities. And it's not bad. It's not bad to take shelter of some of these things, but we have to understand that they're temporary, that they can change at any time. The only real shelter is divinity. And this is, I think I said the other day, like, I would just be happy if my daughter just had God consciousness. Because when I think about it, like, my husband's 46, I'm 35, like, we're old for having kids. I mean, my husband's especially old. Sorry, husband, I know you're on the phone, but especially old for having kids. We're not going to be around very long. And she needs to have shelter that's deeper than us, because we're not going to be around for most of her life, frankly, which kind of makes me want to cry, but it's the truth. And we need to take shelter in something that's sustaining, something that's enduring, something that's not temporary, because ultimately everything in this material existence is, and it's going to be pulled out from under us. Anybody who's 46, I don't mean you're old, but old for having a kid, it's up there for having a kid. When you think, like, I think we were talking the other day, he's like, I'm going to be close to 70 when she graduates college or gets married. That's old. It just is. And this isn't anything we haven't talked about before, my husband and I. So I'm not throwing him under the bus. We know it. And for me, it's like, okay, I really hope she can develop some God consciousness, a strong relationship with God, because that's the only relationship that we can really take ultimate shelter in. Anything else can be pulled out from under us. Anything else is built on a foundation of sand. It just is. It's unfortunate. I wish it wasn't true, but it's the reality. Your career, your achievements, people you love. It's a nice shelter, but it's short term. It's short-term shelter. We need long-term shelter, right? We need long-term shelter. And that's what divinity is for us. So that's why we need faith. And that's why we need this process. That's why we need this Gita, this Sangha, this knowledge. So that's the last text here that we'll go over today. The only real shelter in this world is taking shelter of divinity. And we can start small. We can start small. It doesn't have to be absolute. Faith doesn't have to be absolute. Try some of these practices on, see how they impact your life. Okay, that's all I had. Does anybody want to share any final reflection before we end for the day? I know Leonie said, I like what you just said, Leonie. I'm going to read this. I know that I know that I don't know, and I don't know that I know. Nice little, a nice little play on words there. Davy Radica says, when we stop seeing the lessons, whether we like them or not, our hearts start to close, and that is to be the saddest life one can live, close-hearted. Yeah, that's a nice takeaway. She also says, it's the old phrase, walking the walk instead of talking the talk. Yeah, really nice reflections here. Okay, my friends. Well, that's all that I had for today. And we went much over, so I apologize for that. And I'll see you all on Thursday. Thank you for coming and sharing. So good to see you all.
Haribol.
Haribol.
Thank you, guys.